Was I clear enough in my question? What I'm trying to figure out is, in light of the fact that I myself have witnessed what grow operations look like in residential neighborhoods, and they look quite innocuous, but indeed they represent a hazard to public safety. So I'm worried that this requirement will actually have an inverse effect. You have to recognize that we are not just targeting marijuana grow operations. There's the whole issue of the chemical production of certain drugs and narcotics. So this bill is not targeting grow operations, marijuana grow operations exclusively. The cases that this section would target would be cases where the use of highly volatile chemicals are used to produce certain drugs. Very often, those chemicals can explode and therefore cause a lot of damage. It can easily cause damage to real property or human beings. And so that's exactly the type of case that we are referring to in this particular section, Section 3. It doesn't just cover marijuana grow operations that on the outside look harmless. Mr. Saint-Denis, there are two issues that I'd like to raise with you. Firstly, I'd like to get back to the issue of the department's study about minimum sentences. In 2002, there was a study, a research project that was carried out by Carleton University, and in fact it was available on Justice Canada's website. Gabor and Crutcher were the professors who led that research project. They concluded that it was impossible to measure a positive or negative effect of minimum mandatory punishments, and that only by focusing on rehabilitation would we be able to actually have an influence on behavior. Was any of that research included in the development of Bill C-15? Answer: that study was commissioned by the department. But I just want to make sure that those researchers were not of any political affiliation. Yes, and readers were advised that this was an independent opinion. Nonetheless, the study was published on the department's website. But to get back to your question, yes, we were aware of the existence and of the scope of that particular report. To the extent that we were asked to draft a bill, a piece of legislation that contains some directions and guidelines, well, even though the content of that research project were interesting, the usefulness was limited. Now, you and I had talked about the fact that there were some policy issues to consider, and that we must appreciate that the minister will be appearing before this committee to address some of those issues that have been raised by various witnesses. So I do fully understand that, given your experience, you have helped carry out the instructions given by the government. But, Chair, I just want to underscore the fact that the conclusions, the findings of those research projects are not categorical. And as I stated earlier, were referring to the situation in the United States, not the situation in Canada. In this country, we weren't able to find any reference to test our knowledge against. We were looking at the U.S. situation, and our findings are not unequivocal. And you have to understand that the U.S. situation is not the same as it is in Canada. The demographics are completely different, factors are different, drug use is different. What kind of conclusions did you come to pertaining to the U.S. situation? Well, I'm talking about Gabor here, the Gabor report, because we heard from U.S. witnesses who tried to enlighten us by talking to us about their experience. Allow me to return to the issue of therapeutic medicinal use. And this ties into Senator Wallace's question. You talked to us about the meaning of Section 3, 1B. There is a reference to the production of marijuana under subsection 3(1)(I). A prison sentence can be less than 6 months if the number of marijuana plants cultivated varies between 5 and 200. You replied that you are not trying to clamp down on the university student who is growing a couple of marijuana plants in his dormitory, but really you're trying to target criminal organizations, organized crime. Mr. Saint-Denis, you and I know fully well that in Canada, drugs are a huge problem. And that the therapeutic use of marijuana is becoming an increasingly significant issue. 8 years ago, the Senate had looked into the matter. And in fact, I remember you were one of our witnesses, and you had many, many interesting things to say. At the time, you said that there were some 400,000 Canadians who used marijuana at least once a year for therapeutic reasons. Today, witnesses who we've heard from recently confirmed that there's some 1 million Canadians who use marijuana for therapeutic purposes. Now, generally speaking, most Canadians will favor the therapeutic use of marijuana. And in fact, I think there is a support rate of some 85 to 90%. And in fact, many Canadians have written us letters since Bill C-15 was introduced. And they felt that the net was being cast a little bit too wide.